The notion that it's that this precarious and riskful world is somehow a bad thing didn't dawn on Americans very early.
To Control Tower, we are about to take off on the highway of tomorrow. Stand by.
To call Americans optimistic or something is just would be like the most cliched imaginable expression. That's also not ridiculous.
In many cultural fronts, Americans are seen as optimistic people filled with hope.
The deep love of the future. Americans are deeply interested in shaping the future. That's what it's all about.
Strange shapes will rise out of the night.
I think this is so deeply ingrained in the American mentality that there's no alternative to it, no viable alternative.
It will be like a star burning bright, lighting our way into
I do think that there is something almost pathetically hopeful in the American philosophical tradition.
I mean, Americans have always been accused of being optimistic.
But it's not limited to the academic philosophers of the American philosophical tradition. There's a reason why Hollywood endings are Hollywood endings.
I think our geography is part of the source of our being a forward-looking people, always looking to the frontier, always looking to the empty spaces that we perceive as empty. I mean, never mind the native traditions and the native people there. We conveniently ignore that, but we tended to look to the West as a place where one can always escape. So that in the frontier thesis of Turner, I give a lot of credence to, and I think this is part of that optimism, the idea that there's that there are greener pastures and somewhere out there.
Optimism in the United States comes at a very high price. The price is that of a certain kind of psychosis.
Each enterprising achievement brings wonderfully new ways of life at our fingertips.
I think that the cult of progress, the idea that every new technological innovation or the idea that every new advance is automatically an improvement on the human condition, becomes a kind of psychosis through which we make a deal with the devil at the crossroads. And the deal with the devil is this: if we will ignore the ultimate finitude with which human experience is riddled, shot through, if we will turn our back on finitude, then our reward for that will be hope.
I think the pragmatists are right about this, that life is identical with hope in one sense. That is, to act at all is to believe that my actions can come to fruition. Without that belief, action would be ridiculous.
To say, like, for example, that pragmatism it's a perversely optimistic philosophy, it seems to me, overall.
I think that American philosophy, like America more generally, is sometimes viewed as optimistic.
And I think there's an element of truth in that. They saw the possibility as things to be done, not as a foreclosure in such a way that if they took any step they might mess up the universe.
There is a tendency, and I really do believe Dewey is guilty of this in the end. Although he, granted he says some things to the contrary, but in the main, problems are there to be solved.
I seem to have very much the interest that Americans typically have in resolving problems.
It's an irreducible fact of human existence. We die.
I don't want to wallow in the problems. I want to resolve them. I want to make them go away.
I don't see any answer to that. Why are we born here only to die? It's not a problem to be solved. Any philosophy that tries to answer that, I think is bogus.
It's not entirely clear to me that the representative thinkers to use Emerson's expression. The representative American thinkers are nearly as optimistic or committed to the ideal of progress as either Americans in general or as these thinkers are portrayed by various intellectual historians. So I think that there is a much more critical, cautious attitude displayed by even the seemingly most optimistic of philosophers, John Dewey, toward an ideal such as progress.
I think that one of the things that's true about the American philosophical tradition is that the common distinction between optimism and pessimism is just rejected. We think of optimism and pessimism as pretty much occupying the whole field. You're either an optimist or a pessimist. I think that it's more accurate to read writers like Emerson and James and Dewey in their language as meliorists.
Is James's distinction that he made at the turn of the 20th century between optimism, which is a guarantee of good things to come, pessimism, which is a guarantee of bad things to come, and what he and Dewey called meliorism.
A meliorist, I take it as somebody who says, I don't know, it's not fixed yet, I can't see, I don't have a crystal ball, the future's not set. Will it be good or bad? That's unclear, but my action, my hard work, my strenuous effort is called out in order to make it better than it otherwise would be.
And that's really the attitude that drove American culture, and I think in many ways continues to.
So is there any philosophical progress?
I don't know what it actually means to talk about progress in philosophy.
The very form of the question, is there progress in philosophy, and what could that possibly mean, is really interesting. Well, that's a philosophical question. What does progress mean in knowledge?
The ways in which philosophy progresses are difficult to really itemize.
But I was just saying to my class that some of the best philosophical ideas occurred many, many hundreds of years ago. I think Aristotle has some pretty fantastic ideas, very, very fine ideas in philosophy. And I can't think of a current philosopher who's got ideas in that abundance, of that quality.
Do we know more than Plato did? Well, it's funny to say that we do, because Plato's answers to some of these questions are still on the table. They're still a competitor in the conversation. You may not think they're right, but to say they're not is to engage with them. And so if there's progress, it's very slow. That means we are barely taking a step after 2,300 some odd years.
I think you're always going to have to go over some of the same ground in philosophy, and in that way you don't improve, you just, or maybe the improvement comes in learning how to handle the same sorts of issues again and again. Issues like how to live my life, or what is justice.
Yes, the quarrel between Rorty and Putnam is really intriguing.
Every philosopher feels, and this is to the credit of analytic philosophy, that if analytic philosophy didn't live up to this great dream that the new science and the new logic would solve philosophical problems, that didn't pan out. Nevertheless, we learn more about why and how difficult they are and why they're so difficult.
Putnam represents the pole of thinking which says we're making slow progress towards some kind of a valid and adequate picture of all the philosophical questions. The classic questions are still with us. We're still working at it. There have been a lot of false starts, but we are making progress.
The reason I was so excited by philosophy is that it seemed to make progress and find answers, at least provisional answers, to some of these objects of curiosity that were driving me crazy at the time.
And Rorty says, nonsense. The game is over. The older conventional view that we could answer the questions that classic philosophy had posed is just a kind of self-deception. Philosophy in that sense is over. The idea that philosophy is a science which would finally answer the question of knowledge, the question of reality, the question of moral values, all things of that kind, that's all gone.
I think that since Hegel, a lot of philosophers have agreed with Marx that what you want to do in philosophy is to move history along in a certain direction, to change the cultural climate in certain ways. And this is a task which is different from seeing things under the aspect of eternity or seeing the necessary structure that lies behind contingent historical change. So a great deal of the battle among philosophers nowadays is between historicists who would like to think of themselves as making certain changes in society and culture easier, and other philosophers who see themselves as solving problems, trying to solve problems which have been here ever since Plato and haven't changed since Plato's day.